we are back for episode 7 of CRC Podcast, and I have to say, for this lucky 7th episode, we scored something pretty sweet for the listeners this time out. Not only do we have our first guest on our podcast, we are going to have 2 of them, and not just any guests. We have local motorcycle road racing royalties here with us tonight. We're pretty much honored to have these guys on board, but for this episode's topic of discussion, I can't think of anybody else better than who we have joining for us. So, first up, let me introduce Budman. Say hi, Budman.
Howdy, Dennis. Howdy, Robert, Kevin. How's everybody?
Doing good.
Doing good.
Budman, first and foremost, is the head honcho of Bay Area Riders Forum, or BARF, which is where we're running CRC and its podcast out of. He owns the place, solely responsible for it being arguably the best motorcycle forum site for a while now. But before all of that, he's always been an avid motorcyclist himself, a staunch advocate of motorcycling and its rights, and having been a road racer himself in his days, is a massive motorcycle road racing fan as well, just like we are here. So, Bud, why don't you tell us a little bit about your road racing background? Let the listeners in on your history.
Sure. It's certainly not guilty. I thank you for that. But so I switched from motocross to AFM road racing in '85. Started running Suzuki Cup shortly thereafter. Enjoyed doing that. I was sponsored by KSJO Radio and ran the rock bike for a couple of years. Did couple of AMA endurance races, AMA Supersport race at Infineon, some WERA 24-hour stuff, a little bit of shorter WERA stuff, endurance racing, and just totally enjoyed the whole road racing scene. It's like a real brotherhood. So I still enjoy it, sponsoring AFM class and actually your other guest and a few other guys, and just like you said, big road racing fan. So
yeah, and I mean, I'm not sure if a lot of people know this, but as far as your sponsorship of local racers and racing, I mean, you helped Anthony Alonso out, and in turn he brought the BARF name all the way across the ocean to British Superbike when you raced over there. So that was pretty cool as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, that was cool. We helped Brandon Key a little bit too. He was across the pond as well, and still doing. Brendan Kettleson is sort of the newer kid, although he's been around for a few years now, and just like seeing young guys and not quite as young guys smile.
Now, our other guest is Berto Wooldrige. Say hi, Berto.
Hey, Robert, Dennis, Bud, Kevin.
Yo.
Berto, a.k.a. Whole Shot in BARF, but better known as the current AFM president, AFM being the American Federation of Motorcyclists, which is our prestigious Northern California motorcycle road racing club. Berto, how long have you been racing, and how did you end up to the path of presiding over the AFM?
Well, I'll start with racing. My racing career started racing jet skis when I was 14, and then that went till about 19. And then I got back into motorcycle racing. I started racing. I've been doing it for 12 years, so it's at about 28. So I started racing in the AFM in 2002. In 2005, I've been on the board for 10 years now. So in 2004 or 5, I joined the board with the help of Alex Floria because we hated what we had, this crash rule. We hated it. We thought it was terrible. So I got on and ran. Matter of fact, I kind of ran my campaign off BARF, and I was one of the first ones to do that. Got elected, and we threw out the crash rule and rewrote that to something that was more amenable for the membership. So, and then it's not really an ascension; it's really a descent. My descent into the presidency came after Sean Riley was the president. Then Chris Van Andel came after him, and I followed Chris as the AFM president. Being the oldest board member on the board, it kind of made sense to do that. But as I've done it for the last 3 to 4 years, it's been rewarding in some respects, and it's been very difficult in other respects.
Now, the reason we invited Budman and Berto over to our podcast is because for this episode, we want to talk about the other big road racing news from last season, and that is MotoAmerica. MotoAmerica takes over as the U.S.'s national road racing competition and is sanctioned by both the AMA, which is the American Motorcyclists Association, and the FIM, or Federation of International Motorcycling. But before we get into MotoAmerica itself, let's first go back to the earlier days of the AMA, back in its peak popularity, and then we'll delve into its darkest days as of late, leading up to its future with MotoAmerica. Before I have our guest speakers kind of shoot the shit with Kevin, I do kind of just want to give a little bit of commentary myself. I'm sure we can all agree that U.S. road racing is severely underrepresented at the world stage right now. We haven't had an American road racer really make much of a mark in an international racing series since Ben Spies, and it wasn't even in Spies' MotoGP years that he did that. We have to go back to his one-off year in World Superbike in 2009 to be able to say that we had an American dominating at the world stage. And you know, we did have many other American racers since then fly the flag in either international stage or another national stage. Guys like John Hopkins almost took the BSB title. The late Tommy Aquino, he took a win, I believe, in British Superstock 1000, and PJ Jacobson also did his time in that same series before taking on World Supersport, where he remains today. But there really hasn't been an American that really electrified the world stage since Spies. Josh Herron was our latest export, but he himself, you know, he was an AMA Superbike champion before taking on Moto2, but he had a very, very rough year in doing so, and he was never really able to showcase the competitiveness in such a deep and talented class that I'm sure he would have liked. So, as much as I hate to say it, Herron's time in Moto2 didn't really do American road racing any favors when American road racing was already in a state of disarray. So, but you know, it wasn't always like this. So let's rewind back to a time when American road racing was at its height. Admittedly, I was following it then. So I'm going to turn the hosting over to Kevin, and he and our guests can describe to me and anybody listening that wasn't around to follow the glory days of AMA racing. Kevin, yeah, go for it.
Yeah, I mean, there's been multiple glory days, but from my own personal time, I kind of came into racing following when I was in high school in the late 90s, you know, right when this, you know, the CBR F4 was coming out. I lived basically down the street from Sears Point when I was in high school, and it was getting to the point there where guys like Nicky Hayden were getting, you know, pretty big attention from the world stage. There was massive factory involvement. It was massive. I remember it was like a NASCAR race at Sears Point where the whole area was basically shut down, bikes everywhere. Obviously the economy was doing pretty well, which helps. Ben Bostrom was winning the world, you know, the AMA title, and he was getting looked at by Ducati for World Superbike. It was really a height of popularity where it was considered, you know, easily the best national series. Guys were wild carding at Laguna against the World Superbike guys and winning. And you were really seen as producing the cream of the crop in terms of riders, and America obviously was buying bikes hand over fist at the time. You know, get in 2002, and guys like, you know, Hopper are getting rides in MotoGP basically based on recommendations and some good rides in AMA. You know, there was a day there where if you did good in AMA, you were ready to go to the world scene. I mean, even guys like Eric Bostrom, who were riding for the underpowered Kawasaki, were getting World Superbike wildcards and rides based off of what they could do in AMA.
Wait, so that was the late 90s, the early 2000s? That
was like, no, it was, you know, Bostrom won the title. I think it was 99, Berto, or 98. And then into the early 2000s, it was incredibly popular. You know, Nicky Hayden ended up winning the title and going to MotoGP in 2003. So he won the AMA Superbike title, and that got him a factory ride with Repsol the following year. You know, basically Rossi's teammate. So there was a time period there where winning an AMA Superbike title or doing well at AMA was basically, you know, your fast track to a MotoGP factory ride, or in Bostrom's case in the late 90s, a World Superbike factory ride. It was really considered the cream of the crop there for that time period.
So why do you think that was? I mean, was the talent just better at AMA? Like, well, I mean, because
the talent level was ridiculous at that point. There was, you know, the U.S. was having a pretty big, you know, renaissance in terms of buying sport bike 600s that was when it was almost on the 2-year span of updates.
Yeah, that's true. I mean,
the F4 became the F4i.
Yeah, exactly. They kept putting out new models like every 2-3 years. The F3, the F4, the F4i, the RR, and that was all in like 6 years, which was nuts.
And you also have to remember, right around then also was when World Superbike changed when the Flaminis changed it to the Pirelli rule, and the 1000cc four cylinders were allowed, and there was kind of an exodus, kind of a dark time for World Superbike, 2004, 2005, and that was right around when HRC was sending 3 full HRC CBR 1000s to the grid. Ducati sent a factory team over. They relaunched, sponsored by Parts Unlimited. They even had Regis Laconi, the World Superbike, not the champion, but the runner-up, come to AMA to run some of those final rounds. It was really, really seen as probably even superior to World Superbike in that 2004-2005 range.
Yeah, I mean, that was when the factories were kind of cherry-picking, right? Like, they all decided.
Yeah, that did happen, too. The rules started factories are kind of allowed to cherry-pick certain classes, like Formula Extreme became 600s and things like that.
Yeah, and HRC destroyed with the 600RR and Formula Extreme, right?
Yeah, and the class was almost built for that 600 to be modded out and be kind of pumped up in the Superbike-esque style.
Yeah, too bad they can't make them like that anymore. Right now it's R6 Cup everywhere.
Right. Well, that was the thing, the AMA was courting factory involvement, and they were getting it. And at the time, Nicky Hayden had been the champion. He had gone to MotoGP. They brought MotoGP back to Laguna Seca. He wins, obviously, when it comes around there. Edwards gets second. So the riders were still viewed as top caliber riders, and you had factory involvement. It was, at least for me, living near a track that was insanely popular. It was getting newspaper coverage in San Francisco and around here when it came around. When was the last time you saw legitimate sports sections having front page coverage of AMA riding?
It was getting TV coverage. I mean, TV coverage as far as on not the sports networks, but on the networks locally at times too, if you remember.
Right.
And it's funny. Just to comment on one thing, with the 600R and Formula Extreme, and too bad we couldn't have that now. There's a really well-known team owner that I'm friends with that he was having fits the last couple of years because these 600Rs were getting outpaced by the R6s everywhere, and the R6 chassis is great, but for those guys it really was about the engine. They were getting outmoded on the engine, and he wanted a few small considerations with the 600RR. DMG gave those considerations, the exact same ones, to KTM in the Superbike class, but they wouldn't give them to Honda in the 600 class. And so it's just funny how there is still politics that is very heavy-handed, I think, in the old DMG series. I don't know what will happen to MotoAmerica, but that's...
Well, you're talking about Team Hammer, right? And last year the Hondas got... they could modify the pistons. They could run aftermarket pistons, and couldn't they do something else with the cylinder head, too?
It couldn't. There was something, I can't remember exactly what it was, and I would say what team it was, but they couldn't do, and it was whatever the mod was that the KTM was allowed, they weren't allowed that same consideration.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I mean...
And that happened too. Remember that, Berto, that in 2005 when Eric Boston was riding for Ducati, they let them have that removable part of the frame? Remember that on the trellis frame, they had a spot they could take out. So, at Pikes Peak and a couple of the looser areas, you get more feel. And no one really mentioned that they were just removing whole portions of the frame, and no one said anything. They were like, "Yeah, well, Ducati can do it. Go ahead."
That's right. But there were also at that time period, I think that was about the time Damon Buckmaster was running the R1, which wasn't really an R1; it was an R7 that they had modified to appear to be an R1, but their R1 was a combination R7/R1 frame and chassis, if I recall.
So right. An R7 that fit the bigger engine?
Yes, correct.
That's nuts.
Yeah, and you hear these stories. It's pretty funny. I'm sure Kevin's heard these stories, and you hear these stories about how the cheating is going on and what kind of cheating is going on, and they're worthy of a book. I wish Kevin should be the guy to go do it, but somebody should go out and gather these stories and write a book on it, because there's some of the funniest ways you've ever heard cheating, and it's going on everywhere. And so I know it's still going on everywhere.
Well, but so to bring it back though, because the racing was still awesome. Like we had amazing coverage, like good racing throughout, even though the factories were spread around all different classes. Like that was still the heyday of American road racing, right?
I mean, at least in the modern age, you know, until Spies showed up in World Superbike and it became, or in AMA Superbike, it became the Spies and Mladen show. I remember even Mladen was fighting those RC51s pretty heavily, you know, because those were basically World Superbikes in AMA. It made good racing, and to me, it was, you know, it was great racing. You had a lot of factory involvement, all kind of different bikes, and it was definitely, we didn't know who was going to win. It's like any racing, there was 3 or 4 guys you were pretty sure were going to win, but it didn't become like when the downfall kind of started, when you just knew it was either going to be Spies and Mladen and no one else was even close.
And, you know, I'm going to argue the counterpoint a little bit. I think it was a heyday in racing as far as participation from people on the grid down to spectators and people coming out and watching and a bunch of interest in motorcycles. But I think that the racing we've had under the DMG series, at least for the 600s, the Superbike stuff's broken, but for the 600 series, I think that was some of the best racing we've ever seen in the country as far as parity and competitiveness. And I'll submit proof to that in the form that we had an AFMer that went out to the Daytona 200 and beat the factory team and won the Daytona 200, and that was when Joey Pasquarello won.
Right.
I remember that.
He was sponsored. Jeff Leggett from Mach 1 Motorsports sponsored that deal and put that deal together mostly, sent Joey out there, and on Perry Melichek's bike there, and Joey went and won that race, which was, whoever thought that could never have happened in the golden age of motorcycle racing, which is definitely the golden age. It could never have happened. It was impossible.
Well, hold up. Let me interject with this one, because you know you and Kevin are kind of pointing out 2 different eras as far as the golden age or the heydays. Bud, you there?
Yeah.
Let me ask you this, because you've been following AMA probably longer than any of us, and you still are. Just in your opinion, like, what would you call would be the golden era of AMA?
For me, it's the late 70s, early 80s, actually even into the little bit earlier middle 70s is kind of when I first caught attention to it. I was in high school, and I'd go to an AMA race and I'd see Kenny Roberts and Yvonne Duhamel and Steve Baker and Gene Romero and, you know, all these guys that were just destined to move, you know, forward in the Grand Prix racing, and were doing things that I'd never seen before. So that was pretty big for me. I mean, even guys like Mike Baldwin, you know, the Formula One 5-time winner, you know, late 70s and 80s. You know, there was some great 2-stroke racing back then, and guys would run 2 classes. Kenny, Vaughn, they'd run the big TZ, and they'd run the little TZ. And guys like Baker, you know, won both at Laguna, and you know, Roberts did that, and Duhamel won some, and then you fade into Jimmy Felice, you know, dominating in the 250, and then Rich Oliver taking over. So, I mean, the golden age for me, obviously, being a little bit older guy, really goes back to those early years and seeing Lawson and Rainey and Schwantz and Cooley and all those guys in the beginning of the Superbikes, and then making their move onto the world stage.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point, right? Like, even Ben Spies and Nicky Hayden, they moved over to GP, but they didn't dominate right away. You know, I mean, King Kenny moved over and did it right. He did it from the off. And we haven't seen that from Americans since. I mean, the competition is obviously slightly different, but that very well could be the heyday, because Americans were at the top. Like, they brought in a new style of riding. They dominated the second that happened.
Yeah, they really, you know, sliding the back wheel, which Kenny did, and hanging off further than the guys ever did before him, really did sort of change the whole scene. And, you know, then you just saw it was almost like a waterfall of talent hitting the Grand Prix from the United States. And there was even though it wasn't on, the internet to watch it, and you didn't have the coverage, and believe me, when Cycle News showed up, you were focused on that, and when you got to see a race, which was usually quite a bit later, man, you really paid attention because it was some good racing. So for me, there you go, Dennis.
Okay. Well, I think that fit into a kind of a perfect storm too, where the GP tires and what was going on the world stage really hadn't caught up with the motors yet, and so the U.S. riders had a base that the Euro riders just didn't have. So they came in almost like bringing a gun to a knife fight, and had a style that I remember. The Barry Sheen he still tries to say that Kenny Roberts wasn't actually dragging knee and wasn't riding the rear tire. They were so kind of caught off guard by the style the Americans were bringing in, and it took a long time for the Europeans to really catch up to that. And even the Australians, complimented the U.S. riders on that long before the Europeans did.
Well, it's all from dirt track, right?
Right, and and I think that's part of the reasons why it's not that Ben Spies or Nicky Hayden were particularly less talented as much as by the time the early 2000s rolled around, a lot of the series were on similar machinery and riding styles were somewhat similar, so they didn't have that ace in the hole, so to speak, that the guys that were coming over in Bud's time really had. There was like a paradigm shift in how you rode, kind of like what Marquez is doing now to an extent with and Moto 2 is kind of changing the accepted style of how GP guys want to ride.
I think that's a really good point, Kevin. You are seeing a big shift in the riding in the last couple of years, and that era of the two-stroke USA God racers certainly did the same thing. There was more of them doing it than we're just seeing now. But you're definitely still seeing guys doing a little bit differently, and it's fun to watch.
Well, let me bring this back forward to the Spies and Mladen era and AMA, and let me ask you guys this: do you think that those two being in a completely different class of their own in AMA Superbike, did that at all cast a shadow on the whole AMA kind of competitiveness?
Well, Berto, you probably remember there was that whole time span where everyone thought Spies and Mladen were cheating. Remember they have traction control that no one knows about, and they're doing ignition sequences that are changing the bike, and there was this almost sort of cognitive dissonance that they had to be cheating because they were so much better than everyone else. Remember, they even actually just randomly allowed everyone one year in the middle of the season to have traction control right before Laguna, and it's almost like no one wanted to admit that we had two, World Superbike champion level riders mixed in with national riders.
That's right, but back to the cheating is, my opinion on that is I think at that top level they're all trying to run the gray line, and they probably were cheating to a point, but you know what? So was everybody else where they could. They were just pissed they couldn't cheat as good, I think.
If you're not cheating, you're not trying.
Yeah, it's kind of that way in a way. I mean, it's like when you win, NASCAR's a great example of where you can win a race, cheat your ass off to win it, and everyone gets to see your car in the winner's circle, and your sponsor is really excited about it. And then on Monday they say, they got caught for cheating, and you get a $25,000 fine, and guess what? They take the win away. Well, guess what? You got all the coverage, and that's why I think that was going on. I think it goes on everywhere in racing. I'm just cynical, but that's my opinion.
Well, I mean, even if they weren't, they definitely had more resources, though, right? That team was top spec compared to their competitors, which were lacking factory support, right? By the time Spies and Mladen were teammates, weren't the grid coming down a little bit in spec?
Well, I mean, Yoshimura wasn't even really a true factory team in the same way that Honda was actually. Before Honda switched to in-house work, they were sending HRC bikes. They were running 3 at one point. I think they had Bostrom, Duhamel, and I can't remember who the other guy, and Zemke, all at the same time trying to beat Mladen.
On the 1000RR?
On the 1000RR. Before they switched over, they had the 1000RR for an HRC first.
Yep. And there's something to teams that just have synergy where people can think they're cheating but because they're so good and they're able to put it together every weekend. But a large part is, you guys probably know, but a large part to racing is not just the rider or just the bike or any of that. During that time period, you had data guys that had to read the data and had to understand how to do that. You had the chassis engineers and the engine engineers, and you had the crew chiefs, you had the Ben Spies and Tom Hausworth relationships, and you put all that together, and that created a winning team. You see it right now in NASCAR with Kevin Harvick and his guys. They're unbeatable right now, roughly, because of how good they are. You saw Villapoto and how well he did. It's not, I have to say, a lot of people look at the rider and think it's just the rider, or it's just the bike. It's that team effort. And those other teams, I've seen more in the last couple of years from the inside of the team than I've ever seen. And when you have dysfunction inside the team, you get some big problems, and they're really hard to overcome. So I think that's a part of it. Of course, I also think that Yoshimura had Suzuki's support, and Suzuki was pouring a ton of money and research and development and resources into that Yoshimura team. And they weren't working at the world stage as much. Go ahead, Kevin.
I was saying that's really obviously for those of you listening who don't follow, but that's kind of like analogous to what was happening in Ben Spies' team that second year in MotoGP with Factory Yamaha, where the team became disarray and they were, they started infighting, started blaming rider, blaming team, or the opposite side is Marquez's team basically so 100% perfectly behind him and working and innovating, inventing kind of, changing the pit stop dynamic to the jump off straight to the bike, never even touching the ground, and having a team run so perfect. It really is a team effort that can really either boost or take the floor out from under the rider.
Yeah, we've talked about that before, like with Rossi and Jeremy Burgess. They clicked together really well, but then at the same time the dynamic of GP changed, and he got his new crew chief, and now everything is supposedly better. Like it's not like the whole dynamic changed. It's not like Rossi instantly became a better rider. It's just that he worked slightly better with his crew chief and was able to perform and put out the results. So yeah, we've definitely talked about before how motorcycle racing is definitely a team sport.
Basically, it wasn't long after the Spies and Mladen era, or at least when that ended, that at least taking it back to AMA is when AMA kind of started spiraling downwards as far as popularity or prestigiousness, and a lot of people were blaming DMG about that. First of all, and this is just, you can say it's kind of like almost a devil's advocate question, but is it really fair to say that DMG was all to blame for AMA's descent?
No, not all to blame. Everyone blames the economy.
I don't. I blame DMG. And I'll tell you the exact time that I basically stopped watching was when they basically hand-picked Spies to be their champ because they didn't want Mladen to after having broken the record for most wins, when they decided to tear his bike down inexplicably out of nowhere, but not Spies. Going back to cheating.
The polished crankcast, right?
Yep, polished crank, and then they wouldn't, and then all the talk was they needed to break down Spies too, same bike, same teams, everything, and they simply fell on deaf ears. Me personally, I'm somewhat convinced they did not want Mladen to be the champ.
Or they wanted controversy and something to sell in the headlines.
Well, that could be it, but I think it backfired pretty strongly if that was their plan.
No, they definitely wanted controversy because they put a stationary car around turn 2 at Laguna.
Yeah.
Remember how crazy it was going to be? Remember, Berto, they were going to give $50,000 for a win and stuff? Remember when they first announced that they took over? They were going to have this massive purse, and they were going to have purses every race and all this. It was like everyone thought, holy shit, this is godsend, it's going to be awesome. And then, oh God, what a letdown.
Yeah, the France family has a lot of money, right? Like, that was supposedly the promise, was that they were going to bring their expertise and their funding into American road racing, which had lost the height of sales in 2006. Sales were cut to a third within 2 or 3 years.
And what I think happened to them there, I think that, get an airplane over, 1.5 spins in an airplane, you ain't getting it out. You're going to hit the ground. And I think the same thing started to happen to American road racing to a degree, is that the AMA at the time, there was a decline there. I mean, I know for the Superbike Shootout, we got all the numbers that had happened at Sonoma and how that attendance had declined. And before DMG even got there, things were in a pretty good tailspin going in there. So DMG's plan to pick them up, I can't put the fault entirely on DMG, that they couldn't get him or they couldn't get American Road Racing out of the spin that they were in. On the other hand, I also know that DMG, when we took them over, we thought, well, it's NASCAR. They're billionaires. They'll make it work. It didn't work that way. The way the Frances worked with that thing was they let internal struggle happen within the DMG group itself. They didn't give them support at the NASCAR level that people thought they were going to give them, and it was like bitter infighting that was going on over there at DMG. And not to mention the fact that from all the stuff I hear, it sure sounds like they didn't capitalize the thing correctly. They fairly undercapitalized it, and I think at the same time, NASCAR itself was declining, and we can see that when you watch a race, you look in the stands, and NASCAR was losing a bunch of attendance itself, and I think that they decided, you know what, we acquired this AMA Superbike or Superbike series, and we just don't have time to deal with it. We don't have the money to push into it. We need to make sure that our NASCAR series survives. So I think there were a lot of pieces going together there that basically did not allow NASCAR or Daytona Motorsports Group to adequately care and feed the AMA series, and they just shoved it off into the corner and went, you know what, let's deal with our core business and make sure we get that right, and we'll worry about the DMG thing, or we'll worry about the DMG AMA series when we get a chance. So, and of course we know there are problems between AMA themselves and DMG, and the main problem that comes down to when I see business problems like that, it tends to come down to personalities. And
yes, Berto, talking business.
Yes. So the personalities were conflicting from DMG to NASCAR itself, and then from DMG to AMA. And so you can take some key people and say those people were the problem, but I don't think you can put it all on them either.
Yeah, I mean, well, it's just that was about like 2011 or 2012, right, where they kind of realized that they needed to focus more on NASCAR. But for a few years before that, they had the plane and tailspin, and then they decided to lop another wing off by instituting like silly rules and pissing off the factories and essentially pissing off a lot of the fan base, which is not something that. Which is not something a company like KRAVE is ever going to do today, like someone that actually knows motorcycle racing.
KRAVE's an interesting element in itself. One of the things that I've noticed a big difference from KRAVE to how DMG took over right away is that DMG started making changes right out of the gate. They didn't really understand motorcycle racing, and they didn't try to, and they started making changes the very first race. They didn't go run the series for a year as it currently existed and then say, okay, now we know what we're doing.
Yeah, like what can we actually fix now that we can recognize what the problems are?
Exactly. KRAVE is doing that. They've decided they're going to run 2015 as a bridge year to get them to their 2016 series, and I think that's a real smart way to go. I think that's very conservative, but I think it's very smart too. The problems I think that people talk about with AMA, they talk about them in a magnified sense. We see that in the Racer's Corner with the AFM in itself. The problems themselves are not huge, but they're very big and bountiful problems for people to talk about. Whether they actually are real problems relative to the series and it surviving, I don't think they are. And I'll segue that to what my next point is, which is that there's racing, which is the on-track part of it, and then there's the business side of racing, which is the off-track side. And I think that really started to have an impact that people didn't see. And the way that works is that the tracks themselves, take Sonoma. Sonoma pays a sanctioning fee to the AMA, say $200,000, to take and bring their show to Sonoma. Sonoma, in turn, sells tickets to try to recover that cost and then sell more than that so they can put money in the bank. What really happened is people weren't coming out to the races. So Sonoma's paying a couple $100,000 for AMA to bring their show. Then they have their expenses on top of that. They only sell $100,000 worth of tickets or $50,000 worth of tickets, and that's it. And they end up taking a loss of $150,000, $200,000 on the deal. After a couple years of that, they say,
that's not best for business.
Yeah, we don't have you back anymore. We can't afford it. And the AMA themselves doesn't go and say, well, we'll cut the sanctioning fee or we'll do any of this, because they're so bloated at the top, they have to pay their expenses. And they're AMA Pro Racing, by the way, they're a dying breed in themselves. That happened at the pro racing level before DMG even got to it. Then DMG got to them, didn't go and re-control those costs or do anything having to do with how their sanctioning worked or any of that, and they basically sucked the money out of the tracks. So then the tracks in turn, and this is all based on what I've learned with all my conversations with the people at Sonoma, but the tracks in turn go, you know what? I'm sorry, we don't have any money for you. You've sucked it out of us. We're going to go get money from track day providers and local clubs, and we're going to make sure our business model works. And so all of a sudden, the pro racing stuff, they don't have anywhere to go. They don't have any TV deals. They can't put those together because they've sucked all the money out of it, and they don't want to put any money into it to invest into it. So that's where I think road racing fell apart, to be honest, is that they couldn't get people to the tracks to make it monetize correctly. And that, if you trace how the dollars work, it traces right back to AMA Pro Racing, whoever owned it at the time, whenever we're talking about the time. The dollars trace right back to AMA Pro Racing, and AMA Pro Racing was reticent to say, okay, we got to fix this.
We still see that today, right? Because Dorna with MotoGP charges an arm and a leg to run a race, and they keep upping their fees. But it's becoming more and more difficult every year for the tracks to actually pay it without government support. So, I mean, and especially, countries that have more than one round in the country, like it's very difficult for them to actually fund it. And I mean,
at one point, the MotoGP race in Spain was paid for by the government, and they were selling tickets for $1.
Yeah, exactly. And they got a lot of people there, which was great, but I'm sure the track didn't really make very much money.
No.
Economic systems start to collapse. They collapse in totality, and right. So if you can't get people to the track, you can't sell your drinks and all of your tchotchke stuff you have at the track, and you also can't get exposure to your sponsors that have to be there. So that revenue falls, and it's this. It consumes itself. It eats on itself. I know of one track we have here in the United States with the Dorna deal that the rumor is they haven't paid Dorna. I don't know what's the current status, but as of last year, they hadn't paid Dorna for stuff, and so there was big problems with that. That's a bad way to go, and I don't know exactly how that developed or why it developed. I just know that was definitely the word on the street. So I think that when we get into road racing, we talk about what happened on the track. Kevin's absolutely right about what happened on the track. The underlying side of it, though, is that you got to make the dollars pencil, and if they don't pencil, you're done. Right.
Well, we're seeing that with COTA, right? Because COTA is predominantly funded by the state of Texas, and they don't run track days, right? Like, we haven't had an AMA event there yet, and they bring in Formula One, they bring in GP, and yet somehow they're supposed to make enough money to actually fund their races and fund the fact that the track costs like $350 million or something.
Yep, and MotoAmerica is going to COTA this year, though.
Yeah, so come on, let's segue. So MotoAmerica is the new hotness in AMA or in American road racing, and they're sanctioned by the AMA. So we already brought up the name KRAVE. Berto, can you give us like a quick summary on what KRAVE actually is?
Yeah, because I actually don't know, and I was like, I'm just going to pretend like I know what they're talking about.
You know it. You're lying. You know better than I do, I'm sure. KRAVE's the I don't know all the names in it, but it's the new the KRAVE is the MotoAmerica series, which was developed by Wayne Rainey and Chuck Axland. And they have we can pull up all the guys. I'm sorry if I'm forgetting a couple of the names, but I forget them from time to time. But that's what the KRAVE initials stand for, and their concept, of course, and Wayne's insistence is on bringing younger riders through the AMA feeder series, through the clubs, and through the AMA feeder series to be able to push them out onto the world stage, and he wants to be able to control kind of how that works, and I think he's a great guy for that. They're going to use our national AMA Pro Series to do all of that. So that's essentially what KRAVE's mission is get us some good racing here in the United States and get it on TV. But the whole reason to get it on TV is not necessarily to make money for everybody, but to get young kids out and get their careers started so they can get out there into the world stage on stuff.
That is the true thing that American racing needs is kids. Guys like Marquez and Rossi and these top level guys. Even Hayden were riding from being elementary school aged. not starting at 15, 14, 16 on 600s, but riding pocket bikes on go-kart tracks and up and up and up and up and up, and supported by a national series that actually invested in that age level too.
Yeah, so we need household names when they're young so that you follow them throughout their career and they actually gain popularity and they bring viewers to the actual series.
Because I was actually thinking of this last weekend. For those listeners who know, I do Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu on the side just as a hobbyist. And sometimes you hear these people talk about, oh, Americans don't want their kids riding bikes because it's dangerous. But, football is not safe. And I'm in a tournament where there are like 6-year-old kids arm barring each other. I mean, literally attempting to break the other kid's arm and doing, rear naked chokes and stuff.
Yeah.
These are, and this is, a high school gymnasium sold out basically of parents sending their kids into fucking battle. You know what I mean? It's not that parents don't want their kids doing these kind of more dangerous activities or somehow we're softening up as a country. It's just that there's not a support system there to make it easy and effective and regular for kids to do this.
Yeah, I mean, like the youngest kid recently, right? Anthony Alonso. He may not be the youngest, but that's the one. I mean, I've met him, I've watched him race, and he's pretty freaking awesome. But at the same time, he had to leave the country to actually get any exposure, and that's terrible. Like it's bad for our American road racing that he actually had to bounce to another national series to be able to further his career.
Yeah, Berto, what's the AFM doing about this?
Oh, we're doing nothing. No,
right.
Actually, that's not AFM. That was all Wera, right? Anthony Alonso raced with Wera, and unfortunately, he didn't have anyone to race with. He spanked the entire F3 grid every time he showed up. Like when I first started racing, he was faster than me on his little tiny bike, and like there was nothing the U.S. could do. There was nothing Wera could do.
And another problem we kind of had was with equipment on these kids. Now that all these smaller bikes, the 320 and the KTM 390 and the Yamaha 320 and the Ninja 300 are out, that really gives these kids an option. But before that, if you think about it, all we had was a Ninja 250, the TZE and TZRs. None of those were around. 125s were barely around. You had to go find some bike that was 10 years old from someone somewhere, and so
you go to Rich Oliver's camp and steal it out of a shed when no one was looking.
Yeah, or knock the guy out if he was looking. But
right,
I think we have a perfect storm for greatness once again because we have all these small bikes these kids can be on. Because a lot of clubs won't let a kid younger than 14 get on a 600. So what do you ride? What the hell are you going to ride and get any good with?
And there was we had the Grand Prix Riders Union there for a minute running Grand Prix two-strokes, kind of like a pseudo-national series, but that kind of just fizzled out.
Yeah, it was the GPRU.
Right.
And it was they really tried hard. I don't want to say, it's going to sound bad when I say it this way, but it was kind of a quasi-circus, only because a circus in the sense that they were a tight-knit family that traveled from race to race to race, and you raced the same people all the time. So how much diversity do you have when you're always racing the same people? They just weren't a big enough group, and they really did try, but it just didn't work out.
So MotoAmerica is doing something different, right? They've got the KTM 390 Cup, and last time I heard they have 19 little kids signed up for it.
And not pandering to Harley?
Yeah, that's helping. And sorry, not 19, it's like 14. And there's even a company, actually there was a company that was renting Harleys like on a round by round or a season basis for that series, and that company's actually moved over to the 390. So potentially there could be more kids, because they are little kids running these races. So that could very well build our presence in, build American road racing and make it relevant again, because these kids are going to start off well on small bikes and then slowly move up through the ranks and hopefully get to the world stage.
Bud's been a big supporter of all the kids and financially and of course logistically, and so he understands a lot of these families, the stuff they go through to get these kids to the races. And the sad part is when you watch a lot of it, you realize there's nowhere to go, and there wasn't anywhere to go in the AMA and DMG. Now I think there's some place to go. You can go buy a KTM 390 Cup bike for $10,000 or whatever they are, you can put your kid on it and you can showcase him out there on the stage. And I think the idea that they have at the KRAVE level or the MotoAmerica level is that those kids will showcase themselves on these 390s, and they will get deals on. They'll get contracts with the Supersport. It's not Supersport. Supersport's the premier level one there. The
600, yeah.
I think it's sport bike in the sport bike class, and they'll start moving up.
Super stock.
Super stock. Okay, yeah, you're right. Super stock. My bad. So. But I think that's what they're looking to do is progress these kids from 390s to super stock to super sport and start moving them through the ranks and through the teams like they do at the European level. And on a muted note, I believe that MotoAmerica is trying to help facilitate some of those transitions when they come around. But that's
KTM, right, is offering an all expenses paid trip to Europe to run one RC 390 Cup round as like the championship prize for the MotoAmerica Cup.
Right. Plus, with Greece's austerity, the euro's at an all-time low.
I can't remember actually what.
I'm going to keep doing it, Berto. I'm going to keep making comments.
I can't remember what national series the prize is in, but I know that it's in Europe. And I mean, it's awesome, right? Because the winner will get some exposure elsewhere. Right, like, I mean, on best case scenario, that could lead to a Moto3 ride in a different national cup or even in international cup, because obviously if you're going to win a small bike class over here, you have to have some talent. So, and that's what teams are looking for internationally, right, is young kids to build talent throughout. So
that's right.
I mean, I don't know if a 390 Cup rider will move to Super Stock right after that. I would kind of hope that they'd go to Super Sport. I've had a few racers describe to me Super Stock as in like class for the young kids on 600s and the old guy cherry pickers, which I'm considering signing up for.
Which no one's accusing Berto of being.
No.
Yeah, he's faster than me, so you might as well let's hook up and do the Laguna round, Berto. Come on.
Oh God, I hate that track. I'm sorry, I hate that track so much.
Well, come tow me around it in May, and I'll let you know if I like it or not.
Okay, just don't give me a crash. I do it too much.
But yeah, I mean, MotoAmerica, right? They're motorcycle guys hosting a national motorcycle road racing series to benefit motorcycle racing in this country, which is not something that we've had for a while, right? Like,
that's right.
Like Larry Pegram, like within the past day or two, commented that the reason why he likes his rider Nicolo Canepa in World Superbike was because Nicolo is not interested in like the paycheck or the flight. He wants to ride as fast as he possibly can and do as best as he can on that bike. And that's what we need throughout racing, is guys that aren't in it for the money. They're in it to make this sport better.
Wait, not in it for the money. Berto, I'm waiting for you to talk.
Yeah.
Don't let me down.
Let me tell you one thing. Yeah, I won't. Here's the deal. If you want another good secret, if you want someone that is paid well below minimum wage for everything they do, it's a motorcycle racer.
Yeah.
Unless your name is Rozzy.
No argument there.
Correct. But a lot of these guys, they don't get paid anything. Some don't get paid unless they win. Some don't get paid, period. They just come out and ride for free and try to get their name out there. And when you really look at it, there's not a lot of money in motorcycle racing. It's kind of like, why would you do it? But we know that there is, it's the drug, and it's the drug for the parents, and it's the drug for the kids, where they want to be out there and want their kids to do well. So hopefully the money comes back and we can get some, those, what are they paid? Everybody talks about what they're paid, but hopefully you can get a guy that's a mid-pack guy he can make $50,000 a year, $40,000 a year, or something like that to swing a leg over a bike, because he can at least pay his house payment and feed himself and whatnot. But right now you're still a little far from that. So it's still hard to be a professional motorcycle racer and call yourself a true professional when you also have to have that day job as well to pay the bills, Yeah,
I mean, they're not there in GP, right? There are guys on the grid that have to bring money to the team, and the only reason why they're able to survive for the whole year is because the team is like paying for their food and their lodging, and they have personal sponsors that are footing the bill.
Well, at one point, Chris Vermeulen offered to ride the Tech 3 bike for free, which apparently happens more than people think, where riders are offering to ride in MotoGP on pretty decent teams for no salary.
Yeah, and that's GP, that's Tech 3, that's like the fourth best team on the grid, which is in the best series on the planet. Like, it's crazy to see how little money there is for the riders, who are the ones that are risking their neck out there. You know, those are the ones that we should be paying the most, but it's so expensive, and we don't have all the outside funding from companies outside of motorcycle racing. And I mean, there are plenty of things wrong, but I think that MotoAmerica is definitely moving in the correct direction, and they're really trying to make sure that they're setting up the foundation to help build a successful road racing series in America.
They are, and they're reaching out. We had the meeting, was it in December, out at AMA headquarters, and it was, let's see, the AFM was AFM. We're CVMA didn't make it, but they were invited. CMRA is the Texas guys. MRA was there. Utah SBA was there from Utah. CCS was there from out west. Moto West GP. I mean, it was a lot of clubs that were there. All the presidents or owners of the clubs were there, and we met with the KRAVE guys, the MotoAmerica guys, and the AMA Pro Racing guys. And the focus of that meeting was to try to figure out how the clubs were in alignment with MotoAmerica and with the AMA Pro Racing and AMA period. And so that's the first time anything like that has really happened, which is a big it's a big plus for the sport. It's a big plus for the amateur racing, because suddenly there's a pathway now that we can start to chart, where when somebody calls us at the AFM, we can tell them, okay, here's your pathway to get to be a pro racer, or to be whatever it is you want to be. Here's how you get there. And so I pushed really hard. I don't know if it'll happen. I pushed really, really hard for, in their telecast with MotoAmerica, if they would just recognize what club someone came from, because that alone will, I mean, it's cheap, it doesn't cost anything, but that alone will pay huge dividends back to the club. So if you see that Josh Hayes is from Wira and he's winning races, you look around in your area and you go, hey, I know what Wira is. It's the racing series, and Josh Hayes raced there, so I could be Josh Hayes. So I'm hoping.
Yeah, because that's not really any different than, professional stick and ball sports. I mean, the start of every football game, professional game, you hear the guys say what school they went to. And in every college game, they generally, when the starting defense comes out for the first plays, they have the graphic of the guys saying what high school we were playing at. You know what I mean? Then you realize, oh, okay, I need to, do well in high school to get into a good college, and a good college gets me into the draft, and yada, yada, yada. Same kind of thing, lay out, what the basic groundwork is to go from, hey, I feel like racing would be fun, to, okay, here, how do I actually seriously follow this?
Kevin, that's the exact example I used with them too. And I got to talk, of course, at our dinner, I got to sit across from Rob Digman, who's the president of AMA, and Wayne Rainey for an hour and 15 minutes or whatever. And I was able to impress that on them, exactly what you just said. So, you basically said, I mean, independently of me saying it, you said the exact same thing, which is exactly the way I see amateur racing melding with pro racing in a very organic and natural way, where it's not, staged out or looks really weird on screen or anything like that.
Right, because a lot of the vast majority of riders in this country have some sort of dirt element to their riding history, and it seems like you'd say, like, oh shit, I ride dirt bikes, I'm 12, this is on, oh wow, if I go to this, he's from what club? Oh dad, this club is right here in California, they race all up and down the West Coast. Let's try it. You know what I mean? Get me a little mini bike and let's do it. You'll see that kind of stuff happening. You got to let people know how to transition, from even the more basic amateur, like, amateur weekend motocross races, getting them onto a road bike, and then getting them taking the next step.
Well, now it's going to be a 390 Cup bike, right?
If they're that age, correct. But they, you could end up with a 17 or 18-year-old that hops on a 600 and goes and wins. Joey Pasquarello goes and wins the Daytona 200 too.
Yeah, that's
right.
True. Yeah, well, I mean, what JD Beach just did pretty good today. and he's on a 600 and is doing awesome. So that transition from dirt to road racing still works out.
Yeah. Skills are skills, right?
Yeah.
Right.
If only I had them.
So, I mean, and what it really amounts to is that no one knows where their journey ends. We just know where it begins, and that's kind of what we're trying to sell within the club stuff, is that your journey begins with AFM if you want to go club racing in Northern California. Down south, you got a couple options as well, but your journey begins with the club in your area, and where it ends is wherever it ends. It could end. Ben Spees is a CMRA guy down there from Texas, and his ended at MotoGP, right? His ended at MotoGP. So, it's just, where does it begin and where does it end? And as riders start looking at racing and thinking, hey, I want to go do that, I got to tell you, they have no idea where it's going to end. When I started racing, I never ever thought I'd race AMA Pro Racing, and I did it for 4 years and raced some pretty cool races. I raced the Laguna round when MotoGP came back to Laguna, and there was 100 and some odd thousand people there. And even though you're just a sideshow for it, it's a neat thing, and it's a neat feeling to be out there. So it's one of those things that, like I said, nobody knows where they're going to end up. You don't know what you're going to end up and what you're going to do, but the club racing.
Yeah, but it's the same thing, like you said. Yeah, you're the sideshow, but if you're a 16-year-old kid and you're riding that 600 for the first time, you're riding the smaller bikes, and you're part of the sideshow, but dude, right across the paddock is Valentino Rossi or fucking Marc Marquez or Nicky Hayden. There's what I want to be. You know what I mean? Talk about inspiring guys to take that step and keep following forward. That's, you got to get those things kind of tagging along, start and show. It shows you right there the same weekend where you could end up if you just, have the right mix of talent, skill, luck, and all that stuff, combined. There it is.
Absolutely. And I'll do a shameless plug here if you don't mind, Rob. For $99, you can come out and do a race weekend at AFM. You can get your NRS racer school done. You can do a race weekend on AFM for $99.
I just got my license last week.
Yeah.
Well, listen. On that note, we do have to wrap up this episode. We're going to see what MotoAmerica is going to bring. The first round is going to be on April 17th through the 19th at Road Atlanta. I want to thank Berto for joining us and sharing these.
Wait, no, you missed one. No, the first round's at Coda.
That's April 17th.
I looked at their website.
No, April 10th through the 12th is Coda with MotoGP.
Okay, let me then redo that then.
Nah, stick with you. Just don't know what you're talking about.
All right, fine. Yeah, I looked at it wrong then. But in any case, I do want to thank Berto for coming in and joining us and sharing the experience with AFM and having to work with MotoAmerica. And also Budman. We did unfortunately lose Budman, but we're glad that he was with us for a few minutes and share some talk time with us on the air.
And stay tuned for Kevin and Berto's business hour, letting you know which stocks you need to get.
No, but stay tuned for the next CRC episode, which should follow. It should be sometime at the end of this month or early in April, because this month we have the third preseason test at Qatar for MotoGP this weekend, actually on the 14th. And then immediately after that, round 2 of World Superbikes in Thailand is going to be in March 22nd. And a week after that is officially the start of the MotoGP season with round 1 in Qatar. So the next CRC episode is going to follow all those events. So thanks for listening in, and stay tuned for the next one.
And more on Jack Miller's mullet at 12.
and thanks, you guys. Thanks to Kevin for his vast expertise on the AMA and the Pro Series. It's awesome listening to him, because he always knows his shit when it comes down to that.
Someone please quote Berto saying the words "vast expertise" and Kevin.
and awesome listening too.
Right.
Oh, shit! Don't forget the shit part in there too.